My dad kicked me out because my stepmom falsely accused me of stealing my stepsister's college savings. From the moment I was old enough to grasp it, my family felt like a solid rock, a dependable foundation. My parents were my first protectors, my guides, my constants. But life has a way of throwing unforeseen twists. And for me, that twist came in the form of my father's remarriage. It started when I was 17. And as soon as Becca, my new stepmother, and her daughter, Alexa, entered our lives, a subtle but deep divide grew. No matter how hard I tried to bridge it, I soon felt like a guest in my own home. After my parents' divorce when I was 7, I spent years with just my father, who became my hero. When Becca and Alexa came into the picture, I wanted to believe they could become family. But from the beginning, I sensed an invisible wall. My efforts to get close were met with indifference, cold looks, and an underlying feeling that I was an unwanted reminder of a previous chapter in my father's life. Becca's eyes barely acknowledged my presence, and Alexa treated me as though I was merely passing through. I went off to college not long after they moved in, trying to tell myself that maybe we were all just adjusting. But even when I returned home for holidays, their behavior never changed. Their hostility was masked with politeness. But it was there, an icy edge that lingered in every interaction. Every forced smile, every quiet dinner, and with time, it became more pronounced. During one particularly challenging holiday season, I returned home after finals, exhausted but excited for the break. Yet as soon as I entered, the familiar coldness filled the room. I couldn't ignore it any longer and finally approached my father about what I felt. But he brushed it off, saying Becca and Alexa were just adjusting to having me around. They love you, they're just shy, he would insist. I knew in my heart that this wasn't the case. They didn't love me, they didn't even like me. But I swallowed his words and tried to let it go, focusing on saving enough to move out soon after graduation. Then came the fateful day. I'd gone out with friends to look for apartments since I was on the verge of finally being able to afford my own place. I returned home that evening to find my father waiting. His expression hardened in a way I'd never seen. He was furious, his eyes accusing and cold. As I entered, he barked out an instruction that hit me like a slap in the face. "Pack your things and get out." I was blindsided, and for a moment, I thought he was joking. But the anger in his voice was real. "You've disappointed me beyond measure," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. I felt myself unraveling, confused and heartbroken. I stammered, "What did I do?" Becca appeared, her face twisted in anger, and launched into a tirade about how I had selfishly stolen Alexa's college savings. She claimed that I had come to her, saying I was in financial trouble, so she had added me to Alexa's savings account to help out. Only to find later that I'd spent it on luxury items. Bags, shoes, clothes, things I hadn't even seen in my life. My head was spinning. None of this was true. And the accusations felt like daggers. I pleaded for evidence, for anything to prove that I'd touched the account. But my father wasn't interested. "We already looked through your room," he said bitterly, "and we found everything we needed." Becca claimed that bank statements proved it all, but refused to show them to me. Even Alexa stood there, glaring as if I were a stranger who had harmed her personally. I was heartbroken beyond words. My father, who had known me all my life, believed them without hesitation. Despite everything, I was cast out of my own home, with nowhere to turn. I spent those initial nights on a friend's couch, numb with disbelief. The betrayal gnawed at me. I replayed the scene in my head, trying to make sense of it, to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. Over time, I managed to pull myself together and find an apartment. I worked hard, budgeting every dollar, determined to survive on my own. Slowly, I began to rebuild a life away from the people who had so cruelly turned on me. The years passed, and with time, I learned to live without them. The pain dulled, though it never entirely disappeared. I avoided family gatherings, especially those involving my father's side, and even cut off contact with my mother after she had urged me to forgive him. She hadn't been there, hadn't seen what I had endured, and it was easy for her to advise forgiveness from the sidelines. She couldn't understand why I couldn't just let go. 8 years had slipped by when, out of nowhere, my father showed up at my door. I wasn't prepared for the wave of emotion that hit me. For a second, I wanted to slam the door in his face. But something stopped me. He looked older, his face lined with regret, and his shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen. Against my better judgment, I invited him in, curious and a bit wary. He had come to apologize. He said, eyes downcast. The truth had finally come to light. Becca and Alexa had orchestrated the whole thing. Becca, it seemed, had been using Alexa's college fund for years, hiding it by blaming me. In a strange twist of fate, her own parents had revealed the truth during a family feud, sparking a chain reaction that led to my father's realization. She had framed me to secure her and Alexa's lifestyle, using me as a scapegoat to cover her deceit. The full weight of her betrayal had only recently dawned on him, and he was left picking up the pieces. His words stirred a deep, conflicted anger within me. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let go of the burden I'd carried for so long. But I remembered those painful nights, the feeling of being cast aside, and I knew it wasn't so simple. Forgiveness might come, but it wouldn't be today. He asked for my support in his divorce, hoping that maybe I would understand and help him navigate this new chapter. But I couldn't. The scars he'd left were too deep, too raw. I don't owe you anything, I told him, my voice steady but firm. You made your choice, and I made mine. I built a life without you because you showed me where I stood. In the days that followed, I thought often about forgiveness. Friends and family urged me to let it go, to find peace in moving on. But forgiveness, I realized, isn't a gift you give to someone who broke you. It's a decision you make for yourself, when you're ready to release the hold that pain has on you. Perhaps one day I would be ready, but that day wasn't now. Instead, I chose to focus on the life I had built, a life defined not by betrayal but by resilience. Becca and Alexa had taken something precious from me, but they hadn't broken me. I was stronger than the lies they had woven and more resilient than the anger that had once consumed me. In the end, I came to understand that family is more than blood. True family is built on trust, respect, and love, the very things Becca, Alexa, and even my father had denied me. And though I missed the family I once believed in, I learned to cherish the friends who had stood by me through it all. The ones who had become my real family in every sense. This story isn't about revenge or anger. It's about reclaiming myself, about finding the courage to walk away from those who couldn't see my worth. The lesson I carry with me now is this: sometimes, the people who break you are the ones closest to you, but they are not the ones who define you. You define yourself by how you rise after the fall. I told my daughter that I would not attend her wedding if her biological father was present. But she now believes that I am stuck in the past. As the day drew nearer, the joy surrounding Luna's wedding was bittersweet for her mother, who had spent years nurturing a deep well of unspoken pain. Behind the scenes, amid the dress fittings, floral arrangements, and endless guest lists, she harbored a truth known only to herself and her husband, a truth bound in secrecy, locked in trauma, and now bubbling dangerously close to the surface. For most people, a wedding is a time to celebrate, to gather loved ones and share in the promise of new beginnings. But for Luna's mother, this day was tangled in the memories she had long buried. Once she had desperately tried to forget, yet could never escape. With each choice Luna made, her mother saw herself confronting an unresolved past. A past she had once sacrificed so much to keep hidden from her daughter. Her mind replayed the day Luna had approached her, glowing with excitement, full of dreams and plans, sharing her hope to have her two fathers by her side to walk her down the aisle. It was a dream that felt, to Luna, innocent and simple, but it was one that shattered the mother's heart. There was no way Luna could have known the silent agony her wish would evoke or the memories it would claw back from the depths. Inwardly, she remembered the betrayal from so many years ago. She had once trusted Luna's biological father, had known him as a friend since they were children, someone her own family had admired and encouraged her to spend time with. When he had crossed the line, violating the sanctity of that trust, it had forever changed her life, shattering the innocence of their friendship and casting a dark shadow over the joy that Luna would one day bring. In the years that followed, she had leaned on her husband, who had been her anchor, her unwavering pillar of support. He had loved Luna as his own, despite the whispers and looks from people who wondered why Luna looked so different. Together, they had created a haven for Luna, a family life devoid of the painful truth, one in which her birth was celebrated, even if it had been born of unspeakable pain. But now, Luna's wedding plans were ripping open old wounds. The mother's mind whirled with emotions she had kept so tightly bound for decades: anger, sorrow, helplessness, and the panic of facing the very man who had inflicted so much trauma upon her. She wrestled with herself, torn between protecting her daughter's happiness and safeguarding her own fragile heart. Could she bear to explain to Luna why her wish was so impossible? Could she risk unearthing the truths she had buried to protect them both? She knew Luna would not easily accept her refusal. Luna didn't understand. She couldn't understand, but how could she let her daughter, on the most beautiful day of her life, be walked down the aisle by the man who had nearly destroyed hers? As the silence stretched between them, the mother felt the weight of a decision she had dreaded making. She knew that standing by her convictions might cost her a place at her daughter's side. Yet allowing her daughter's biological father back into her life could fracture the delicate peace she had fought so hard to maintain. In the days that followed, Luna's mother spent countless hours lost in thought, agonizing over the painful memories, trying to find a way forward. This wedding had become not just a celebration of her daughter's love but a test of her own resilience, her strength, and her heart's capacity to protect her family from a truth she had once vowed to bury forever. Days passed, but Luna's mother found no peace. Each time she tried to visualize herself at her daughter's wedding, standing beside the man who had violated her, it became harder to breathe. Her husband, noticing her distress, gently suggested she speak to Luna. "She deserves to know the truth, or at least enough to understand," he said softly, but even this suggestion felt unbearable. How could she reveal such a painful truth to her daughter, the very person she had fought to protect all these years? When she finally gathered the courage to approach Luna, her daughter was busy planning the final touches for the ceremony. Luna's face lit up with joy as she described her dream wedding day. Seeing Luna's happiness only intensified the mother's pain, and she struggled to find the right words. "Luna," she started, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to explain about your biological father." But Luna interrupted, a look of impatience crossing her face. "Mom, I know you and Dad have had issues with him, but this is important to me. I want him to be part of this day. He's my father too, and he deserves to be there." The words hit like a blow. Her heart felt raw and exposed. But she knew this conversation couldn't wait any longer. She took a deep breath, holding back tears. "Luna, he may be your biological father, but he is not the man who raised you. He hurt me in ways that are hard to explain." Luna's brow furrowed, and a flicker of realization began to dawn. "Mom, what are you saying?" Luna's voice wavered, sensing the gravity of her mother's words. So, with trembling hands, her mother shared the story she had long buried, the friendship turned betrayal, the devastating impact it had left on her soul, and the choice to keep Luna and raise her in love despite the trauma. Luna stared in disbelief, and the silence that followed was deafening. She seemed unable to process this new truth, her mind racing to reconcile the father she had just come to know with the man her mother described. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. "I wanted to protect you." Her mother replied, "I wanted you to feel loved and cherished. I never wanted you to bear the weight of my pain." Luna remained quiet, torn between loyalty to her mother and the need to forge her own relationship with her biological father. As the weeks went on, she struggled to make sense of her emotions. She avoided the topic, caught in the conflict between honoring her mother's boundaries and fulfilling her vision of her wedding. The tension mounted until the day before the wedding. Luna and her mother had barely spoken, and her mother had withdrawn from the planning altogether. Feeling hurt and unsure, Luna made a decision, one that would set the course for the next chapter of their family. On the day of the wedding, as guests gathered in the chapel, Luna's mother waited at home, dressed but uncertain if she could go. Her husband encouraged her to join them. "This is your daughter's day," he reminded her. "Whatever happens, she needs to know you're there for her." Finally, with her heart pounding, she arrived at the ceremony just as it began. She saw Luna standing at the altar with her husband at her side, his cane supporting him as he stood. Her biological father was not present. Luna had made a choice. She realized her mother's absence would cast a shadow over her day, and she wanted to honor the woman who had been by her side through every challenge. After the ceremony, Luna approached her mother with a look of vulnerability. "I didn't know how deeply this hurt you, Mom," she said softly, "but I do now. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like I didn't understand." Tears filled her mother's eyes as she held Luna close. "Thank you for understanding, even when I didn't think you would. I love you so much." That day marked a turning point for both of them. Luna's mother realized that healing would require courage and honesty. Not just for herself but for her family. Together, they committed to rebuilding their trust. And Luna promised to be more considerate of the hidden burdens her mother had carried all these years. In the months that followed, Luna's mother began attending therapy regularly. Working through the trauma that had haunted her, she learned to forgive herself for the guilt and shame she had carried and to see her pain through a lens of compassion. Luna, now closer than ever to her mother, remained a steadfast support, understanding that her wedding was not just the beginning of her marriage, but the beginning of a deeper connection with the woman who had always protected her. Through this journey, both mother and daughter found new strength in vulnerability. They learned that some wounds take years to heal, and some truths, though painful, are necessary to fully embrace the future. Their story became one of resilience, proof that love and understanding can rebuild even the most fractured bonds. And so, with their relationship renewed, they embraced a future where the shadows of the past no longer held them captive but became stepping stones to a life filled with honesty, acceptance, and unbreakable love. My brother-in-law peed on my belongings for months. Discovering a horrifying family history of *say destroyed my marriage. I remember the day I first moved in with Ted and his roommate, Ash. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a step toward building a life with the man I loved. Ted and I had been together for years, meeting as wide-eyed college students who fell in love over late-night study sessions and countless cups of coffee. Moving in together was supposed to mark a new chapter, where the small annoyances of campus living gave way to the quiet, hopeful dreams we both held. At first, things seemed normal. Ash, Ted's older brother, was quiet and polite, if a bit reserved. We all adjusted to our routines, and I settled into my role, trying to keep the house tidy while focusing on my career. It was a peaceful life, or so I thought. But then, little by little, things started to feel off. A strange, musty odor began to linger in the bedroom, an almost sour smell that I couldn't shake. At first, I shrugged it off as something trivial. Maybe it was the old furniture, I thought, or perhaps it was the dog, an elderly, friendly creature who shuffled around the house, though he rarely ventured upstairs. Yet, the smell grew stronger, clinging to my clothes, to the blankets, even to the shoes I left by the door. It was unnerving. One evening, as I was folding laundry, I noticed a pair of jeans that reeked of the same scent. I had washed them just days before, yet they seemed saturated with something unpleasant and unmistakable. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized it wasn't just a bad smell, someone or something was targeting my belongings. The weeks passed, and the mystery only deepened. I found myself inspecting my clothes, sniffing cautiously each time I folded a garment, hoping I was wrong, but the signs were there, each one more unsettling than the last. Ted was perplexed, dismissing it as a mystery we'd solve soon, but I was growing desperate for answers. Each day in that house felt more and more like walking through a maze I couldn't escape. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't an accident, that someone wanted me to feel unwelcome. Then came the moment when I decided to set up a small camera in the corner of our room, hoping it would capture whatever was happening when we weren't around. It was a small act, but I needed to know the truth. Little did I realize how this decision would unravel everything I thought I knew about my new family. The next morning, I felt a mix of dread and determination as I sat down to review the footage. My heart pounded, and my hands shook as I clicked play, wondering if the mystery would finally be solved. At first, the video showed nothing unusual, the empty room bathed in the soft glow of streetlights through the window. But then, hours into the recording, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Ash, my brother-in-law, was standing in the doorway, his face obscured in shadow. Without a sound, he crossed the room and began urinating on my belongings. My stomach twisted, and a sense of betrayal hit me like a wave. This was no accident, no mistake. Ash was deliberately marking his territory, defiling my space, violating my trust. In that moment, I felt 1,000 emotions at once: shock, anger, disgust. The man I had shared a home with, the man I had trusted, was behind this sickening behavior. And for reasons I couldn't yet understand, he had chosen to target me, and only me. With this vile act, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to confront him, to scream at him, but I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of this discovery. Instead, I packed a bag, grabbed my cat, and left, finding solace with a friend who graciously took me in. For days, I replayed the footage in my mind, unable to shake the images. Why would he do this? What had I done to deserve such hatred? I felt humiliated, as though I'd been intruding in a family that didn't want me there. And, most painfully, I began to question everything about my relationship with Ted. Ted was horrified when I showed him the video. He assured me he had no idea Ash was capable of something so cruel. And he promised to support me through this nightmare. But as we spoke, I could see the tension in his eyes, a hesitation that gnawed at me. As much as he loved me, Ash was his brother, a bond that stretched back years before we ever met. And for reasons I couldn't yet understand, he felt a duty to protect him, despite the horrific betrayal I had just endured. Then, another layer of the story unraveled. Ted's mother, who had always been fiercely protective of Ash, finally sat us down to explain something I hadn't known. Ash had a history of trauma. Growing up, he had been subjected to various forms of abuse, bullying from siblings, relentless pressure to meet impossible expectations, and a lack of support from his parents, who always seemed more concerned with appearances than with Ash's well-being. This trauma, she claimed, had left him deeply scarred, causing him to act out in twisted ways as an adult. Ash had been attending therapy, or so I thought, but in another twist, I found out that his so-called therapist was actually a family friend with no qualifications. Someone who merely pretended to treat him so his mother wouldn't worry. For 3 years, he had kept up this charade, avoiding real help and letting his resentment fester. My presence, it seemed, had triggered something in him, a jealousy, perhaps, or a feeling of displacement. And rather than confront those feelings, he had chosen to take them out on me in a way that was both cowardly and cruel. With each new revelation, I felt as though I was drowning in a sea of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I could understand the roots of Ash's pain, the way his family's neglect had driven him to lash out. But on the other, I couldn't ignore the damage he had done, the way he had shattered my sense of safety and respect. I began to resent Ted's mother for shielding him, for enabling him, even after knowing the harm he had caused. And yet, part of me felt guilty for even feeling that way. This was, after all, her son, a man she loved despite his flaws. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of these revelations became too much to bear. Ted and I, once inseparable, found ourselves drifting apart, each conversation tinged with an undercurrent of blame and resentment. I couldn't forgive Ash, not entirely, and Ted couldn't abandon his family, not even for me. Our once bright future dimmed under the strain, until one day, we quietly agreed to separate. The pain of leaving was immense, a grief unlike anything I had ever known. I returned to my hometown, hoping the familiar surroundings would bring me some comfort. I poured myself into rebuilding my life, taking each day as it came, finding small moments of joy in simple things. I started therapy, determined not to let Ash's actions define me or steal my happiness. Little by little, I learned to trust again, to open my heart without fear of betrayal. In time, I even found it within myself to forgive Ash, though I did so from a distance. I accepted that he was a product of his environment, a man who had been failed by those who were supposed to love him. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, and I chose to keep him, and the rest of Ted's family, out of my life. Through it all, I learned the importance of setting boundaries, of protecting my peace above all else. I realized that I deserved a love built on trust and respect. A love that didn't require me to compromise my self-worth. And as I moved forward, I found strength in knowing that I had survived one of the darkest chapters of my life. In the end, I emerged from the ashes not as a victim, but as a survivor, a woman who had faced betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. And though the scars remained, they were a reminder not of what I had lost, but of the resilience I had gained.